Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Now, only a few weeks ago, was aware, I can't really remember how it came about, but I managed to get hold of this amazing book, The Secret History of Stonehenge, Ancestral Mysteries and Lost Civilizations by Maria Wheatley. And it came in and I have been reading it ever since. You know what I'm like. The audience knows that if I get hold of a book, I can't put them down. And it's my pleasure to have Maria Wheatley as a guest to take us through a little bit, because there's so much to know about Stonehenge and related things. And you might think, well, this is a bit of a strange thing for Richard to be doing on his channel when we're often looking at all sorts of other shenanigans. But I think it's all very much connected to who we are, where we're going, and our spiritual journey and all of that. So, Maria, welcome to the channel. It's lovely to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Richard. It's great.
And I have to say, I'm absolutely not lying at all. As soon as the book came in, I started to pick it up. In the past, I have read a bit about Stonehenge, and I've made, some 10, 12 years ago, maybe longer, a documentary which I called, I can't even remember what I've called it now, History That Doesn't Speak, or something like that, or I can't remember. Do you know, that's really weird that I can't remember. But I was traveling around burial mounds and all those sort of things, and I was very interested. I read loads of books, and I thought, how do you get that into a linear documentary when there is so much to talk about? And of course, I realized that really all you can do is hint at things and let people go away and read books. And in your book, I can imagine that your book could actually be 3 or 4 times the size it is, because you touch on so many things. So let me ask you, first of all, how long have you been doing what you've been doing? You're an author, master dowser, we'll get into that, and of course a researcher of ancient civilization. How long have you been doing all of this?
Oh, for about 35 years now. I mean, I followed in the footsteps of my late father, who was also a master dowser. And I just got into going to different sites around the world. So I take people to the pyramids, Peru, next year, Mexico. And I've dowsed 16 different countries now and numerous different types of ancient sites. So that's what I've always done.
Right.
It's in my blood.
Oh, fantastic. And when you say dowsing, let's just touch on that, because I'm just beginning to get into that. I had a friend who used to do dowsing with the rods, and he told me about the Michael and Mary lines some years ago, and I was very skeptical, I have to say. I've gone on a journey like we all do, and you go, this can't be right. And he would go into places and feel energies and things and start dowsing and going, oh, the lines are going through here. We went to Avebury and Woodhenge and places like that. And he could sense all this stuff. And I was very frustrated because I couldn't. And it really fascinates me, because you sort of go, well, why can't I feel it and he can? So tell me about, what kind of dowsing do you do?
I go far beyond just earth currents. They're not lines, Mary and Michael. They're actually meandering currents that entwine a ley line called the Michael line. So it's one line with two currents. So they're not lines. Yeah, I go far beyond that. I look at numerous different types of earth energy, from spiral energy patterns to circular energy patterns, and really explore the design canons of sites, because it's not just two earth currents that make a power center. Not so at all. It needs an esoteric center marked by a spiral pattern, then earth currents, and then different types of earth energy. That's what makes a power center. So when Hamish, who forwarded one of my books about Avebury, actually, he discovered the Mary and Michael currents. He was on the road writing the book, so he called them lines, but just thought he'd keep them in there to see who could find if they were a current or if they were a line. So that was his prerogative. So yes, I understand all of those different types of earth energy, and I go far, far beyond that, mainly because of my heritage. I've been brought up with it, and I inherited the surveys of earth energies and ancient sites from other master dowsers. My collection goes back to 1899.
Wow. Right. Blimey. So I mean, there's a lot of books out there on places like Stonehenge, which of course is, you know, one of our best heritage sites in terms of tourism, and people come, oh, we've got to come and see that. And most people never get close because of the way that it's all rooted out, and you've got the visitors centre and all this sort of nonsense. And just as an aside, when I was in America, I discovered there was a place called Foamhenge, which was a scaled down version of it, which had no magic whatsoever, a polystyrene Stonehenge, other than the fact that you could kind of see what it was supposed to be. I'm fascinated by the Neolithic people. I don't know as much as I really ought to, but there is clearly, I think, something in all of us now that we've missed the knowledge from those days, and it seems to be, and a lot of my videos are about this, how so much of the knowledge has been taken away from us, that being involved with the energies of the earth, nature, the sun and the moon and the phases of the skies and things. Let's talk about Stonehenge, because it is the subject, the main subject of your book, and I've got a number of things to look at, which I'm fascinated about. But that just lead us through about the many stages of Stonehenge, because when you look at it, you're obviously looking at the last bits, and it's very difficult to see all the different periods.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, Stonehenge began with literally about 8,000 years ago with these huge, what's called totem poles, timber posts that marked the spring equinox. That's about 7,000 years ago. Then there were some timber structures built inside of a henge, and that's a very early phase. I think they were healing temples and rooms, and archaeologists used to think they were circular. Now they know they're rectangular. They got dismantled, and then there was what's called Stonehenge phase one. It becomes a megalithic monument. Most stone circles begin with a timber structure, and there was 56 blue stones. They were taken from the Preseli Mountains and the area around Pembrokeshire, for example, and they were set in a huge circle of 56 blue stones, highly polished, with a chalk bank all around it. So if you imagine that it would have been seen for miles because of the chalk bank around it, that's what archaeologists call Stonehenge phase one. Stonehenge phase.
I'm just going to stop you there, because it was the polished stones that people don't. When you're looking at the monument now and you're trying to sort of visualize it, it's so burnt into our psyche what it looks today. It's very hard to imagine the polish of those blue stones. It must have looked absolutely stunning.
Oh, yeah, because you've got different types of bluestone as well. You've got rhyolite bluestone that came from a quarry called Rossafelin. That's strikingly blue. The rest only appear blue if they have water on them. And there were some green stones as well at Stonehenge and in phase one. So it was a multicolored monument, and that's really the phase one that got dismantled round about sort of 2500 BC. It stood for about 500 years. So phase one is 3100 BC, according to archaeologists. Phase two is the Stonehenge that we recognize. But maybe it got tinkered with. We now know that. So what you're seeing at Stonehenge is phase three and four, because the phase two got dismantled again by another culture, and it got altered and tinkered with. They couldn't take down the huge trilithons. They couldn't take down the great outer circle, but they could uproot the bluestones. And so a culture around about 2200 BC changed it yet again. So it went in various different phases.
And in the 20s, I think it was, in the 50s, that people came in and started to try and recreate it when some of the stones had fallen over. There's some footage on Pathé News and
it was 1901 when the Greater Trilithon was re-erected, and the main reconstruction was by Richard Atkinson in the 1950s. That was the main area of it, because the stones were toppling, and they could have been quite dangerous by that stage.
Yes, and just so that everybody knows where we're talking about, here is a picture of what it currently looks like. And it is, it's a beautiful piece of photography and all the rest of it, which is very lovely to see. Associated with Stonehenge, this is what I found really interesting. I mean, we can talk in a minute about why it might have been moved and what have you, is the burials that took place. And in particular, something I had no notion of is the elongated skulls that are found.
Mm.
Were they natural? Because later on that you talk about other skulls, which were, it seems, at birth, they were misshapen deliberately by people, or at least that's how I
Yes.
interpreted it. But the elongated skulls, who were buried with people who didn't have elongated skulls. So, who were these people who had an elf-like and quite small and thin?
Well, in the Neolithic, people had naturally long skulls. And I was the first to discover this in 2015, that they had elongated skulls. And I photographed them to prove the point at
Right.
Cambridge University. So it seems that there was, and later on I discovered this fact. For example, they had naturally long skulls, born with naturally long skulls, completely different to you and I. But the elite, the rulers, the high kings and high queens, and the priestesses probably, they had theirs extended through cranial deformation at birth. We know this because if you've had a board to make your skull pliable, then you ended up with scars here and scars here, for example. So we know that they had been extended. And in the burials, it seems they were practicing very similar traditions as in ancient Egypt of the same time era, 3100 BC to 2900 BC, when if the pharaoh died, it was a privilege for relatives, people to accompany him in his journey to the other world because they felt that was a more powerful place. So it was an honor. And over here, the lesser elongated skulled people, those that hadn't had their skulls extended, seem to have gone in with the king or the queen that had an extended skull. So basically, it was like two types of people at that same time, and some would enter the burial practices and go into the tomb and become like the guardians, merging with the land. Is a very ancient Celtic tradition.
And you see the skulls, and you'll say you're describing these elongated skulls, and then next to them are the skulls, as you say, the friends and the family, or good servants, I suppose, that have been with them a long time. But they I guess they've been bashed over the head, have they? Because they all got
Some
these.
were, what I discovered was that's right, Richard. Some were ritualistically killed. But that was happening even in the Iron Age, and that was reported by Caesar in his book Dispata. So it was a tradition, but we may think of that as being barbaric. But in
Mm,
the Iron Age, again, it was such a privilege. They had more belief in the other world than they
yeah.
did in this world. Yeah.
Yes.
So
And
it
and
would have been a privilege.
and it's funny. I mean, you say that because people are thinking like that a bit now, that this is just a temporary world, and that there's something to go to next. And we don't die, and the spirit lives on, and there's something more exciting down the line for us. So you can, or I can understand that people would think, yeah, okay, this has been quite nice, but I want to stay with my king, my priest, whomever it was, and move on and carry on that journey.
Yes, and that's definitely what was happening because that wasn't just in one particular long barrow. It was near enough in all of them, especially in the southwest of England. But I even found examples going up to Staffordshire, Derbyshire, for example. So it was literally a practice akin to ancient Egypt. But around Stonehenge, they were very different to, say, Avebury Henge, which is 17 miles to the north, because they were buried with shamanic priestess, like boar's bones made into pendants, or they were placed on fabric like a fringe on a cloak. So when they danced or walked, it would have clattered. They had particular types of incense pots in the Neolithic. So it was really, we know by those artifacts that they were special people because common people, not everybody went into a long barrow in the Neolithic. The commoners had a flat grave like what we will go into today. It's called a flat grave with
Right.
probably just a wooden marker that would perish after time, and they have been found.
Oh, right. What was also interesting, I mean, in Egypt at the same time, there's hieroglyphics and all of that. Is there much evidence of hieroglyphics or sort of carved writings or anything like that around and in the burials in Stonehenge area?
What I did discover at Stonehenge was some runic markings that seem to be repeated time and time again as far north as Derbyshire. So yes, I think they did have some markings that were very similar to runes, but they didn't leave behind any writing as such. And in ancient Egypt, they were using grids to draw out, in the Valley of the Kings and their cartouches. We didn't have that grid system. They had a 16 by 16 grid system in which to draw that upon.
So what may and one of the reasons I asked that is because it went through my mind that maybe they were, because they were much more grounded and using these energy forces that we were talking about, or at least aware of them and utilizing them and interested in the sun and things like that, which in the past I think people have painted them as quite primitive, but I think they were highly educated, but in a completely different way to how we are. And maybe, do you suppose they might have been telepathic?
Well, that's we could don't know if they were telepathic. We will never know if they
Mm.
were telepathic or not. We like to project a lot onto ancient civilizations. What we do know is that they were master astronomers, master geomancers. Uh, 2000 years before Pythagoras at Stonehenge, you have the four station stones, which create a rectangle with very advanced astronomy incorporated into that. If you draw a diagonal across two stones in that stone setting, then you have two Pythagorean triangles 2000 years before Pythagoras. So we can say they were master mathematicians as well. So they were highly civilized. They were also very, very astute in the sciences. We know that because of the alignments they left behind.
Mm. Which I suppose, which is why I was sort of edging towards some form of telepathy or something, because if you wanted to leave information to somebody else and you're not writing on paper, which of course I suppose all that would have perished if they did, you might leave more evidence on stone, as in some form of writing, which maybe think if they weren't having to do that, maybe they're just naturally sending the information on some sort of telepathic spiritual way.
Well, we do know in the Iron Age that it was a bardic tradition. By 750 BC, you had the Druids. Before that was the Bronze Age. Before that was the Neolithic. And their traditions were bardic. You had to learn everything by rote. Yeah.
Right.
So that may have been an inherited tradition from the Bronze Age, from the Neolithic period. So they had writing in the Bronze Age called Ogham, writing, which they put mark on stones as well. It's like, lines that make up a particular Celtic alphabet, if you will. So that came in the Iron Age. But yes, they would have been learning things by rote.
The other thing that I found fascinating, going back to these skulls that were elongated, is the trepanning. This thing about cutting a hole in the head of living people. And now I know that in the Middle Ages or sort of more recent times they would do it because people had horrible brain pressures and they were experimenting with doing that. But I think you suggest that this was much more for a spiritual enlightening.
Absolutely, because when we look at the long skull, just to describe what a long-headed person would look like, their heads were extended this way, for instance, and their head size to their body was in a different proportion to you and I. Our bodies, our heads rather, are 1/8 of our length of our body. The Neolithic, the long skull people, theirs was 1/10. So even though they had long skulls, they had very small skulls as well. And their ear placements were set further back, which may have given them a bit of a fairy, fey, pixie look. So their body proportions were different. You do a double take if you saw one on the street today.
I bet
Now,
you would.
yeah, you definitely would. Now, when you get to about the age of 30, your skull bones fuse together. They fuse. Now, this seems to be with the long-headed civilization, a phenomena where they would fuse early. And it's believed by some that when your brains fuse, you lose your intuition. You no longer feel what's called the heartbeat in the head. And so some people in modern times have had their head trepanned and said they have enlightenment, they have more intuition, they feel uplifted. It's a case of don't try this at home. I
No,
must,
God.
I must advocate. But in the Neolithic, where there seems to be that a fusing of the sutures much earlier, I think that's why they were trepanning. They wanted that intuition, they wanted that psychic energy, that heartbeat in the head to be felt again.
And I think you describe in the book the trepanning, the hole that they're creating in the skull, in the top of the skull, and in different places for different ones that you found, is about the size of a pound coin, something like that.
Yes, it was, and it must have been, quite a standard operation because they were doing it time and time again. One was reviewed by a Wiltshire museum about, or must have been about 10 years ago now, maybe even longer, and they were looking at a Trepann skull from the Stonehenge environs. And they thought that was maybe not for a mystical purpose. Sometimes they were for a practical purpose. And they said that could have been looking at a tumor in the brain, for example. That's according to Wiltshire Museum's investigation. So you did have some practical elements to trepanning. And like you mentioned earlier, for any head trauma, sometimes you would need to do that. But I think generally speaking and overall, it was for higher elevated consciousness.
And and then you went on to mention, which I found, not only do they take the piece of bone out, but they're drilling a hole in it. And either is it them that are wearing it as an amulet, or other people are using it as an amulet, a lucky charm, or something?
I think it was the person. That's a good question. I think it was the person because it was often found right by the skull in the
Right,
burial. But we know they were wearing them as amulets because they got polished and they had a
right,
hole put in them. And it's a bit like the artifacts that were found in some of the long barrows were highly polished. It used to be thought, and still is by some archaeologists, that stags antlers were used to prize out chalk to make a henge. But now they've been evaluated under a very fine microscope, for instance, and they were polished. They were probably a shamanic headdress or gear that you would carry with you rather than prizing chalk because they were so polished.
yeah. And I mean, very, very strange to our way of thinking. Of course,
Hmm.
taking a bone out of there, and obviously they must have survived, as you say. They must have been doing this enough times to manage to be able to get this bone without damaging the brain and without causing too much pain. I imagine I mean, these people would have known nature and plants and perhaps got themselves not inebriated, but what's the word I'm looking
They
for?
had opiates.
Opiates and
They
yes,
had opiates. They've been found in Neolithic long barrows, and especially by the time of the Bronze Age, they were using opiates for higher consciousness and an expansion of consciousness, as well as things like mandrake and other quite, highly efficient numbing. But there definitely was a standard operation, and numerous people survived, and it was all across Europe. You have the Trepanning capital in France, for example. More people underwent it in France than anywhere else. And what they did in France, around the Parisian area, is where you have like your suture going down the top of your skull. They would exaggerate that and make that a huge line, and then cross it here on the other suture, so your hair parting would be dramatic. And I think they were filling that with color like ochre or woad or chalk. So you would look like the priestesshood, because that was done in the Parisian Basin, mainly to women. And even in the Victorian era, they still had the T shape that they were wearing as a hairstyle.
Wow. And so this was gouged out of the
Yes.
bone. Yes.
Yes.
Gosh. I mean, to our way of thinking these days, it sounds just so bizarre. But actually, when you say about the colouring of the hair, we see people. My partner colours her hair. It's not a new thing at all.
Mm.
So all those blue rinsers down on the south coast where I live, they've been doing this for donkeys, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think they were, like for example, if you had a particular ritual, they would grind down red ochre. I think the henges were painted brightly coloured, and I think standing stones were painted because what I find all around Stonehenge, Avebury, even in Egypt, is ochre, and ochre gives natural pigment paint that's been used for thousands and thousands of years of red, yellow, and orange. And it was discovered by Professor Mike Parker Pearson in Dorset that one particular henge, and that's a bank that surrounds a stone circle, was carved with circular shapes, spiral shapes, and chevron shapes. They happen to be the patterns of earth energy as well. So that's incredible. And I go one stage further and say they were definitely going to be painted in ochre. They would have looked bright. So a henge bank could have been an artistic canvas for the Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples.
wow. So let's try and work out, or tell me what we think Stonehenge was about. The reason you would go to these extremes of bringing these rocks such a long distance, and they're still here today for us to wander about and discover. What's it all about?
We know that there's a lot of astronomical alignments. We are in a very unique time span, 2024, 2025, when you have a lunar alignment that only occurs every 18.61 years. And it's when the moon is at its most northerly and at its most southerly. And that's incorporated into Stonehenge, as well as the very famous heel stone, rising of the sun at midsummer, for instance. So it is calendrical to a certain degree. But if we start to look at all of the ancient ways that it was written about in the 12th century, for example, about Stonehenge, well, Geoffrey of Monmouth informs us that no stone at Stonehenge doth not have healing power. And people used to go there for healing purposes. In fact, in the 19th century, and this is quite shocking, they sold hammers in Amesbury. So you could buy your hammer, chip away a piece of the healing sarsen, and they estimate that over 15 tons of
Wow.
sarsen had been taken away from Stonehenge. That was estimated by the archaeologist Mike Pitts relatively recently through looking at laser images of Stonehenge. So I think it was definitely a healing temple, and Professor Tim DeVille agrees with that. I say it's a healing temple because there's particular types of earth energies there, such as a geospiral energy pattern, which we've measured the frequency of that. That's around 7 to 10 hertz. It puts your brain into alpha mode. For example, the bluestones of Wales fame, they are 3 times more magnetic than any other stone in the British Isles. So they were selected for their magnetism. So I think it was on one level a healing temple. And then even by the 16th century, they were still saying it's a healing temple. It's a healing temple. And it wasn't until sort of like, after in the 20th century that it lost its healing status. It became a tourist capital then, not a kind of pilgrimage place in which to go. So I think on the one hand, it was a healing temple. And then if we go again, reading the ancient documentations of the early antiquarians from the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries before William Stukeley in the 18th century, they say it was an oracle place where people would go and receive these oracles, a bit like Delphi in Greece had the god Apollo there. He was a healing god. It was an oracle center. Well, according to the ancient Greeks, At every winter solstice, Apollo would leave his temple at Delphi in Greece and arrive and occupy Stonehenge. It's written in all the documentation. So we're linked now to an oracle and healing center through the healing god Apollo that is said to manifest and occupy Stonehenge from the winter solstice through to the spring equinox. So when we look at these myths and traditions and legends, we can say, is there some truth in that? Is it holy history rather than a legend proper? And I think that's what it is. I think it was an oracle center like Delphi and a healing center. And that's why the sun god Apollo used to manifest there. And it's interesting to know, they said they could see. He occupied it. So maybe there was some kind of, hallucinogenics being used, higher consciousness, where they would relate to their God. We don't see our gods. We don't
No.
see them. They're invisible. What does God look like? I don't know. But they kind of personified their gods. They made them more into people, if you see what I mean. There was a more of
Yes.
a closer relationship. And I think that's where it comes in that he occupied it. They were used to seeing their gods, so to speak.
It's fascinating also in there that, and towards the end of the book is where I was getting really excited because you're talking about the water courses underneath Stonehenge and how many of these sacred sites, you're not aware that there are these amazing water courses. Now, we've had on the show a couple of people who talked about water and talked about the 5 states of water. And it sounded from your description there, you're just describing the structured water in its natural environment, but being very energetic
Yeah,
and
yeah.
giving a lot of energy and power to people, so that they would. Now, we've had experiments in here where I've sampled some energetic water, and it gives you huge amount of extra strength and resistance and stuff, which is far beyond anything I'd experienced before.
Mm,
And it strikes me that if this energy and the water, and of course we're 75% water, and some people say
absolutely.
I mean, we're a water creature, and water talks to water.
Yeah.
The energy and the healing and the sort of recentering, if you like, from whatever life is giving you, really resonates with me on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wrote about the 5th stage of water in terms of healing water in my book, Divine and Ancient Sites, following on from Pollock and a lot of other writers, because as an esoteric water diviner, I know that there's 2 types of water. There's the water that falls from the sky, that fills up the aquifers and the underground streams and the rivers, but also there's another living, more sentient water that is born within the womb of Gaia. Now, I can tell as a water diviner which sort of 2 sorts of water there are by the energy patterns they emit. And the spiral pattern, the geospiral, is the harmonic surface pattern of that. Water has memory. And the ancients were always incorporating the esoteric center, not the geometric center, by that spiral pattern, whether that's the pyramids, whether that's Stonehenge. And that is the Akashic record of place as well, because of the memory field. And I also point out in my book, Divine in Ancient Sites, how we can heal our own body water above these spiral energy patterns. When it comes to the Christian traditions in churches, the font is always set above that type of energy pattern because it starts to imbue water with its healing properties and its energy field that it emits. So it's far stronger than any other form of earth energy, and it's really very powerful. So there's so much going on with underground water if you go for the really deep types of water as well. And then again, in water divining tradition, water goes to water. So just like you have a spring will eventually go to the sea, then you have that occurring in the earth as well. You have the head of the spring that will go to the oceans in the sea, beneath the ground as well. So we see water courses converging at aquifers, for example, like a sea. And that's how you get really a lot of gallons per second by following a stream to its source. And then if you're going to bore water, then you're going to have a lot of fresh, clean water because you're at a convergence point.
And at Stonehenge and in that area, were there springs that we know that are no longer there, that have dried up or been filled in for whatever reason, that people would have gone to drink from? Because I know you mentioned one of the stones, magically, it had a hole in it and was filling up with water mysteriously. And in the end, people started to put rubbish in it and they put concrete in there to fill it up.
Yes, I mean, I mentioned earlier, Richard, that I've inherited a legacy archive of master dowsers. During lockdown, I was starting to go through all of the papers, and I've got hundreds of papers.
I can
And
imagine.
when I was reading the creator of Stonehenge and his interpretation, he was the creator for more than 25 years, highly regarded. He really, really was. And he said that trilithon number 51, the geeks that want to look at exactly where that is, like me, uh, they noticed on the outer face of it, that's on the outside, uh, there was a hole that you could extend it down 2 feet that you could put your arm in. And the creator noticed that literally in a drought, it would fill up with clean water. It just started to be known as being healing. Again, because if we go back to Geoffrey of Monmouth, he says the healing energy is when you mix water with sarsen. You mix it, you make up a kind of curative potion. And so people were literally queuing, and it was said to heal eczema and various other things besides. The Ministry of Works got to hear about it, which was there was no English heritage in the 1940s and the 1950s. It was a government department, the Ministry of Works. They concreted it up. But you can still see, I photographed it on several occasions, taking film crews there. You can see the water that dripped down from it. So how did that get there? Nobody knew. They used to watch it, think, is it coming from the lintel above? Is it coming from underground? And it was no, no, no each time. So it was a kind of magical healing water. I mean, how miraculous is that? These are the kind of long lost history that has been written out of the guidebooks by English heritage.
Yes, I suppose I mean, many reasons I'm guessing, but one is they don't want people to go over there and muck about with all of this stuff. As you say, selling hammers and having people chip it off is one thing, but millions of hands sort of scrabbling about. But that is the water fascinates me. So going back to my question, do you
So,
know of any springs and things in the area that people may have been drinking from, really concentrated, healthy, health-giving water?
yes, again, in water divining terms, you can easily find out which is a healing spring. You use what's called a color dial, an advanced color dial. So I could tell you if you were going to water bore, has it got iron in it, has it got magnesium in it, and it's high frequency colors. And at Stonehenge, they have high frequency colors coming out of that water. So we know that it's healing water. It's highly energized. It really has changed its state from H2O to a much, much stronger water. And there was 2 springs at the bottom of the avenue. I claim there's 3 avenues at Stonehenge, not just the one avenue of Stonehenge fame. And that at each point of those avenues, the recognized one and the unrecognized one, you had these highly energetic springs, and they're the most energetic in all of Wiltshire. I'm not just talking an area in
Mm.
the county, because
Right.
they have this huge, what's called a multiple geospiral energy pattern. Where else would you get that? Lourdes in France, for
Yes.
example. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
And
so
and in a way, Lourdes is a bit like it sounds like Lourdes, what people go to have miraculous healing. It sounds like that's what Stonehenge was doing back in its day.
yes, and there's a very famous one known now called Blickmead Spring, but that doesn't have the energetic qualities. As a water diviner, I look for the energetic qualities. I can say that water is that, this water is this. For instance, so I think that they were using that water for healing, just like places like Lourdes. maybe even for cleansing before you would walk into the stone circle, for instance. One was in the back garden of a house on the avenue at West Amesbury that has been recently infilled. I can remember 20 years ago when it was still a spring, and the other one still exists in a field in West Amesbury as well. And when that comes out of the ground, you can hear it. It's coming out under vortex pressure. So you hear the babbling of it before you kind of see the actual water. So that's really, really very, very powerful. And it's unmarked. No, nobody knows it's there. It's
Wow.
in a field. You bypass it. You know, you wouldn't think anything of it. Yet it's probably one of the most healing places in the county.
Gosh, and I suppose if one did say where it was, people would turn up with, it would suddenly turn into a bit of a tourist trap. People would turn up with their plastic bottles and try and.
It's not an artesian one like at Glastonbury, for example. It's not gallons per second. It's a slow trickle, but you could accumulate it, but you'd have to be a long time just for a bottle. It comes up under pressure with the vortex energy, but not gallons per second. You
Right.
know, but despite all of that, it is still very very healing, and you feel the energy field as you're approaching it. It was really quite something, and I'd like it to be marked. I'd
Mm.
like it to be made into a sacred pilgrimage place. You know, I might approach the farmer, but I would imagine the farmer would not
Well,
resonate with my idea.
Well, unless he's making money out of it, of course,
Ah,
and
yeah,
farmers desperately need money at the moment because they're being squeezed left, right, and centre and incentivised to do anything but grow food, it seems. But we digress. The other interesting thing that I found really interesting is the acoustic and the recording of sound that these stones at Stonehenge possibly are doing, and almost holding the sound of what's going on there. Could you explain a bit more about that?
It was first recognised by Reading University, actually, the acoustic properties of Stonehenge by Aaron Watkins and David Keaton. They were a team. They went around the world, actually, looking at the acoustic properties. And one of the properties they did notice and recognise at Stonehenge was if you're on the inside and there's people on the outside, you can't hear what's going on if you're on the outside, despite large gaps in the stone. So that's kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that. And the sound is focused on the axis line of the monument as well, which aligns to the midsummer sunrise and the midwinter sunset. So you do have all these amazing acoustic properties within the monument itself that has been proved. And there again, with looking at the secret properties of stone, which has been looked at for many, many years now, it's believed that if you kind of project your energy into stone as you're shaping it, like all the stones at Stonehenge were shaped like that. And if you project your thought, if you project anything into that, the crystal matrix is a bit like a semiconductor. This was discovered by Dr. Don Robbins, an archaeologist, and you can program stone. And so he was saying that if these stones were not at Stonehenge, he never went to Stonehenge. I'm saying the ones at Stonehenge are the
Mm.
highly dressed stones in all of the land. You don't get any other dressed stones like that. Then maybe they could have been programmed for sound, and maybe they could have been programmed to release an image. I wanted to catch up with Dr. Don Robbins because he was a part of a big project. He's a very good archaeologist, and he was just a missing person. So he just seemed to disappear into the ether. You can't find anything about him on the internet except for a few of his old books, for example. I got in touch with another author saying I need to track him down because I'm projecting some of his theory with my own information onto Stonehenge. And he said he disappeared, Maria. You're not going to find him. And he was
Okay.
right. I thought, oh, I'll find him on the internet. No, he was right.
He's gone, vanished.
Gone, vanished. And he was saying that the whole circular shape of Stonehenge with the lintels on top were all programmed. And like I said, he claimed they were all like semiconductors. You could program for something, and then maybe they would release a corner of the eye image. And maybe that's where people said, ah, Apollo occupied Stonehenge.
Right. I mean, I find the whole thing, I mean, absolutely fascinating. When you see people, say Avebury, where you've got access to the stones and they visit, and you'll see this all the time because you're near Avebury, people want to touch the stones because, and some people, more sensitive people than other people, will get something from that. They'll feel a connection to something. And I have to say, I've gone and touched these stones and going, please, can I feel something? Maybe I'm trying too hard. I don't know. Or maybe I wasn't ready then and now it would happen. These sort of monuments, even though with the length of time between when they were being used for the purpose they were built for, there is something that draws people to them. And many people just don't know. You know, they may be on holiday and they go, oh well, let's go and see them. And then when they're there, as I say, they want to touch them, they want to photograph them. There's something that's going on, even if they can't really understand quite why. Can you answer what's going on?
What I think is going on when we go to these monuments, like you mentioned, Avebury, we're a very visual people. We see the stones, but what we don't see is what's going on under the ground. For example, Avebury stones are set on a massive circular energy pattern that imbues that stone with energy. And then many years ago now, 18 years ago, with Rodney Hale, I proved that at certain dowsable points on that stone, like energy bands going round like this, if you put your hands on there, you would be able to feel energy because it's rooted into that circular earth energy pattern. And we recorded it. We recorded the electromagnetic frequencies exactly where I got the dowsable energy bands. And that's on my website for all to see, the aveburyexperience.co.uk. Just go to articles, megalithic power, and you will see what we proved. So I mean, I was shown all of this many, many decades ago, and I wanted to start to prove or disprove. I'm a
Mm.
research author. I'll go for the truth, whether, it blows my theory out of the water or not. So I think what some people experience at Stonehenge is the rise in earth energy coming up the stone through its crystal matrix, and then it's released by the stone in aerial energy. And that's what we were recording, the release points on those stones. And a lot of people feel it as tingles, hot, cold. If you put your hands on a particular energy band, band number 3, then you feel a force pushing you into the stone or away from the stone as well. And I've had lots of people experience that when I take them around ancient sites such as Avebury and Stonehenge. Unfortunately, at Stonehenge from 2010 onwards, there was a ban of touching the stones because they said, I think it's an excuse. They want the lichen to grow on it and eventually all be green and furry. Is that what the ancients wanted? I don't think so. But at Avebury, you can interact with them and explore all of these different energetics about it.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So if you place your hand on the stone, it may be if you place it higher or lower, you get a completely different
Yes.
feeling from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
if you place your hands like both palms against the stone with your feet slightly apart, leaning into the stone, you will, and you know which point that is, then you will feel a force push you into the stone or away from the stone or to the side as well. So yes, and like I said, I've had hundreds and hundreds of people experience that. And I don't necessarily tell them what they're going to experience. I put them
no.
into that energy zone because the power of suggestion is an amazing thing and see what happens. And time and again, people feel the force of the megalithic energy.
Yeah, and the other thing, and I didn't fully understand this, I have to say, because I'm not musical really when it comes to it. But the music of Gaia or the music of Stonehenge, you talk about quite in detail, which for me was like, oh, hang on, musical interval. What is a musical interval? To me, a musical interval was like, there's an orchestra, we do the first symphony, then there's a break, then there's another symphony. So I wasn't quite fully coherent of what you were getting at, but
Mm.
you were implying that there is music from the geometry and the physicality of these stones.
Yes, I mean, for example, it was Kepler and Pythagoras that discovered the music of the spheres. What's that? It's the relationship, the mathematical relationship between one planet and another, their orbits. Yeah. They create what's called a mathematical ratio, and that mathematical ratio can equate to music. So, what's a musical interval? It's one note going to the next. C to
Right,
D. That's
right.
a musical interval. Do do. It's the bit in between that you have. It's a musical harmonic, as they're called, and these musical harmonics can be very very healing. And it was many years ago. Fabian Maman, I think he's called, or Macman, I may have mispronounced that, please forgive me, who noticed that, if you use tuning forks and you have certain musical intervals, they're healing. And what I
Right.
noticed about Stonehenge, so if we apply that, it's just don't tuning forks, musical interval. Don't let the maths worry you. They're just numbers. And at Stonehenge, what I noticed was just like what Kepler discovered and Pythagoras, all of these circular orbits create all of these amazing musical harmonics, which legend says Pythagoras could hear. What I noticed about Stonehenge was okay, there's six concentric circles there. I wonder if, like the concentric circles above, these equate to musical intervals because they're on an earth energy pattern that decreed where those circles went. And lo and behold, I got a mathematician, because believe me, I'm not a mathematician. It would take me forever and a day. Even with software, I'd probably be still scratching my head like that. And a mathematician helped me. It was like one of these intuition moments. And he said, oh my goodness, they're all mathematical ratios that equate to musical harmonics. So I'm going to put you in Stonehenge. You've got the massive outer lintel ring, famous, we can see it. You've got the smaller blue stones on the inside. That interval, that gap at
So there we go.
Stonehenge. Yep. So we're talking about just by inside of that sarsen lintel stone circle, stand in that gap before the blue stone, and you're in a musical harmonic called the major third. Well, what's so special about the major third, for example? It's used in Gothic cathedrals, in Christian music, because it heightens your emotion and your
Wow.
consciousness. So this is naturally coming out of the ground through the earth energy and its mathematical ratio. So that's the major third. And that happens three times at Stonehenge, the major third, the major third, the major third. When I looked at the Sphinx temple, which is a temple in front of the Sphinx of ancient Egypt that needs no introduction, we all know about the Sphinx, the same occurred again. The major third occurred three times in different parts. So where we stand at Stonehenge, upon particular sections of the monument, can in turn influence our consciousness. Okay, so I think the ancients were fully aware of this. They had long skulls, their ear placements were in a different place. When I read the reports by anthropologists, for instance, about these long-headed people, they said a constant thing: their ear bones were different to ours. And I gave that to a wonderful doctor in A&E who came to Egypt with me once, and I copy cut paste it. I copy cut paste these reports and said, "Well, what do you make of that then?" And she said, "No, no, no. This is wrong. This is not ear placements." And I said, "Okay, what if it is right? Let's just go down that route." And she said they would probably hear different frequencies. So if
Right.
indeed that is the case, and I can't prove that one way or another, but let's do a hypothesis that if that is the case, imagine being at Stonehenge and you're hearing different frequencies coming out of the stones, like I've recorded, and also out of the earth, like I have recorded as well. Then your experience is your hearing. So, like I said earlier, we tend to go to an ancient site and see things. I think the ancient ancestors, especially the long-headed, had the experience beyond that. They could maybe hear different frequencies, and what an experience that would be. Song lines like the Aborigines, they keep this kind of musical connotations within their energy system on the other side of the world.
And you've got the color, You've got the water energy, the geophysical energy. You've got, I mean, what an amazing place and what an amazing race to have put all that together and in the right place that does all of that. I mean, do you think that we, rounding this up now, unfortunately, rounding this up, but do you think we are, I mean, our civilization and our intellect has gone on a much more, I would say, much more materialistic, a different way. Do you think that these people just had something? Well, they clearly were more connected to the earth, and we seem to be disconnected. Do you think that we are dumber in many ways than they were?
I think some of us are highly sensitive. That said, I really do. When I take people from all over the world into these ancient sites, some people intuitively know where to go, the power stones, and so I think some people are really connected to the earth still. But you're right. Overall, society is more materialistic. That is for sure. You're 100% right on that. But that's where I think people that go to stone circles today, it's like going from the ordinary to the extraordinary because they experience something, they feel something, they sense something that appears to open up their consciousness. I've spoken about even a musical harmonic. The gap between two stones, that mathematical ratio, can send you into a higher consciousness. So I think, and the Avebury stones were carved to musical intervals as well. So we can say, with hand on heart, that yes, people today can go into these stone circles and quite often have life changing experiences.
So, a lot of people would just think they're just some old stones from some ancient rituals, because rituals seem to be what everybody, all the archaeologists would just say, well, we don't know what they are. We'll call it a ritual, and that will sort it out. And you've got the altar stone in which you say, well, actually there were two altar stones, and one's disappeared, and you got some ideas where it might be, but people tend to think, or the painting is pictured of, that they're just some old stones from the past, but they clearly still are serving a purpose for many of us and can attune, as you say, and have life-changing experiences. So clearly people should go and visit these places.
Absolutely. And we were graced in the British Isles. We've got 1,300 surviving stone circles, and you could double or treble that to what was there originally. And yes, I think there was two altar stones, and one was stolen by the royal family in 1624 and taken to St James's Palace in London. I'm sure that people that have heard this, with me talking in great detail on the radio, probably want to burn me at the stake
I'm,
for,
I,
for saying that. But I've got all the evidence for it. Again, I follow the evidence trail. But just to kind of wrap it up, so to speak, I would definitely encourage people to get out into the ancient landscape, to experience these standing stones, go to the places that call you, that you feel a resonance with, and then there's a relationship already there. And respect the stones and respect the ancestors, the spirit of place and the guardian of place, and then experience the earth energies, and you will really be taken somewhere extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would recommend everybody to get your book, of course, The Secret History of Stonehenge, Ancestral Mysteries and Lost Civilizations by Maria Wheatley. Maria, it's been an absolute joy. I'll leave a link, by the way, to that in the description. Is it better that they buy them online somewhere, or can they get them direct from you? Does it make any difference?
It's much better to get them direct from me because Amazon pushed me into a corner where they demanded 60% and I pay the postage and packaging. So I even the mob only took 35%, incidentally.
Oh, right.
So go to my website, theaveryexperience.co.uk, or email me, Maria Wheatley at AOL.com, and I can get your copy. And you'll be helping authors. If you go direct to the author, you'll really help in their research.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of why I asked. I'll leave those
Thank
links
you.
in the description, and I can tell people, because I have read it, it is a gripping read, and you'll go, blimey, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that, and wow, what about that? It's fantastic. So
Thank
brilliant,
you.
well done. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate that, and you've urged me now to get back to these ancient sites and go and have a rummage around and see what I missed, which is a hell of a lot. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that, ladies and gentlemen watching. Do go and visit those sites whilst we are still got cars to go and do that sort of thing. But in the meantime, from Maria and myself, thanks for watching. Take care and bye for now.